Okay, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, or actually it's probably good evening now. Thank you very much for coming out this evening to this event. I am delighted to welcome you all, and also to welcome Andreas Rohl. Andreas is the manager of cycling facilities for the City of Copenhagen. We're very, very lucky to have him here tonight. It's not very often we have somebody with his experience from one of the premier cycling communities in the world here in Penticton. So without further ado, I'll ask Andreas to come up to the stage and we'll get the evening going. Andreas.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, hi, I'm Andreas. I'm from Copenhagen, but in fact working in Canada at the moment until November. In fact, because of my baby son, who is hiding up at the very last row, gave me a good excuse to go on leave from my job in Copenhagen. So I'm here on, in fact, officially on paternity leave from Copenhagen. Very happy to be in Canada. And I have to admit, it's the first time I've been doing a presentation in a venue like this. I don't know, is the sound okay up there? It's a bit overwhelming down here, but I just texted my mom that I was in this big arena, but that I'm not Mario Lemieux yet, because they carpeted off most of the seats, but still, I'm making it into the big places now. Anyway, I've been asked to just give a presentation on Copenhagen, how we work with cycling in Copenhagen, and yeah, I will do that. I'll try to also talk a bit about my experiences in Canada so far. I've been here since February, seen a lot of very nice places, but it will mainly be on Copenhagen. This is two pirates from Copenhagen. I would assume rather dangerous. And this is my neighbor Heidi. She's a doctor, and maybe you can see it. She has like 5 shopping bags on that bike. So she is definitely also a shopper. And I think what she has in common with the pirates is that none of them identify themselves as cyclists. They just tend to use a bicycle when they go from A to B in Copenhagen. And I think that's one way of saying how the context of working with cycling in Copenhagen is that it's so normal to go on a bicycle that very few people identify themselves as cyclists. It's just something you do when you go from A to B, and then you are a shopper or into punk music or a doctor or whatever you are. This is, I'm going to give you a bit of background on Copenhagen, then some numbers, and a bit about what is happening in Copenhagen, and then in the end, a bit on if Copenhagen had to start all over again. And it's called that because I think all cities are quite different, so it's hard to say that you should just do as Copenhagen. I don't think that's how it works. But this is just the resume here is if we should start all over again in Copenhagen. But hopefully on the way there'll be something that of course also can be interesting for the Penticton perspective of working with urban planning and transport and cycling. This is Copenhagen. Copenhagen is pretty similar in size to Vancouver. It's like 600,000 in the central area and 1.5 million in the whole area. One thing it has in common with at least most of Penticton is that it's rather flat. It's good for cycling. Another thing it's in common is Copenhagen is like it's a pretty wealthy region. I think in top 5 in Europe. And even though things are not that good in Europe, it's still a pretty wealthy region. Another thing we have in common is that snow is pretty normal in Copenhagen. Some winters we have snow 2 or 3 months. Other winters we have hardly any snow. But it's pretty common with snow in Copenhagen. In fact, I looked up the weather to compare, and maybe you can see here that the temperatures are pretty alike, even though you have warmer summers and it's also a bit warmer here during the winter. But it's pretty alike. And we have more rain in Copenhagen in general, but the fun thing when I saw this one was the only months where you have a lot more rain than here is the months I choose to bring my family to Penticton. So that's a bit of a bad luck. I should have looked at this one before I convinced them, but no, it's been very nice so far. So pretty similar conditions in many ways between Penticton and Copenhagen, except from the size, which obviously is different. One thing that isn't the same is when we look at how do people get to work and study. If we look at the people in Copenhagen, then the bicycle has a market share of 36%, so that is the mode of transport used by most people to get to work. And this is the 100% here is looking at everybody working or taking education in Copenhagen, no matter if they live 1 kilometer away or 100 kilometer away. And then public transit, a market share of around 30%, and the car, a market share of around 30%. So again, the difference is that in Copenhagen, bicycle is like mainstream, or maybe even it's the mode used by most people to get to work. And if we just look at people living inside the city of Copenhagen and working inside the city of Copenhagen or taking education, then the bicycle has a market share of 50%. So also regarding the context, if you have 50% of your voters, they use a bike to get to work or get to education, then that of course also matters a lot in a political context. Where's the focus, where's the funding? Some of the other numbers there is, if we look at the streets in Copenhagen with the most bike traffic, then we have streets where we have between 20,000 and 35,000 cyclists a day. So in Copenhagen, working with cycling is in fact very similar to working with other modes of traffic, like highways with cars or trains. It's very much about capacity and getting all this traffic moved around in the city. The average length on a bike going to work in Copenhagen and back again is 5 kilometers each way. That's the average. But even between 10 and 20 kilometers, the bike has a market share of 10 kilometers. So even going that long is not unusual. It's just not where the biggest market is for the bike, obviously. 32%, about 1/3 of all trips in Copenhagen is made on a bicycle. So also very used when you go to visit friends, when you go and do your shopping. Just one thing I think is an interesting story in Copenhagen is what we call the cargo bikes. We hardly saw any of these in Copenhagen 10 years ago, and now 25% of the families in Copenhagen with 2 kids or more, they have a cargo bike, and these are pretty expensive. They cost like $3,000 a piece, but now we see a lot of them in Copenhagen. And the thing is, the people with cargo bikes, many of them, they either have a car at home or they can go out and buy one if the city do not deliver good enough quality for also going around with cargo bikes. So that puts, I think, a very healthy pressure also on Copenhagen to keep improving facilities. And the 2 other numbers there is just to say that since the mid-90s, cycling in Copenhagen, the distance has gone up with 25%, and at the same time, car ownership has gone up with 50%. So we have seen in Copenhagen at least that you can have a car, but you can leave it at home during the week if you only go on short trips, or if you only go to do your shopping close by, and then you use your car when you go to buy a lot of stuff, or when you go to IKEA, or when you go to the summer house. And that has been a development that we see very positive in Copenhagen. I think it's good people have access to cars, but we think, if possible, try to use them only when you need to, because in the end that's the best for the city in the overall picture. Just another way of showing the role of cycling in Copenhagen. Just some pictures of cyclists, and the guy down there in the right-hand corner is our current crown prince on his cargo bike, bringing his kid to kindergarten. Again, not because it's anything special, because that's, even for him, it's probably the most convenient. Just dump your kid in and go, and you're off. No big deal. The black and white picture to the left-hand corner is, in fact, in Denmark we've only had 2 Nobel Prize winners, so we're kind of proud of the 2 we had. And one of them is Niels Bohr, and that's the guy on the left-hand corner, on his bike, of course. So just to say, when we look at gender, when we look at income, when we look at occupation, it's pretty much everyone using a bike. It's not really related to anything about income, gender, whatever. It's very even spread out. Also, when we look at smaller cities in Copenhagen, we have quite a lot of cycling. This is Fredericia a very hard name to say even in Danish, so I won't expect you to remember it, but I'll get back a bit to this city. They have around 40,000 inhabitants, pretty normal, just at the sea. And there in a city like that, it's around close to 20% of all trips are made on a bicycle. Not as much as in Copenhagen, but again, very normal. In Copenhagen, the story on cycling, if you look at it historically, is that back in the 50s, Copenhagen had a lot of cycling. This is numbers for cycling going to the inner city in the morning. And it went down for a long time. If you can see this picture, this is from the 50s in Copenhagen. We had trams, and when we had cyclists, that was pretty much what we had on the streets. And then then we were looking to North America. We were getting more wealthy. We really liked the car, and we were planning for the car and kind of building big roads, and the planners really liked the cars. It gave you a big budget to work with, and you could make big things. So that was very popular in Denmark during the 60s and 70s, and this is just a street from the 70s where the bikes are not totally squeezed out, but they're quite hard to see on that picture. And then we started putting in cycling, what we call cycle tracks, which is separated facility for bicycles next to the pavement, and then you have traffic. And we started doing that. We've done that for 100 years, in fact, but we started for real during the 80s. And now we have the challenge with capacity problems on many of the cycle tracks that were built in the 80s that we now have to expand. And in fact, now when we count traffic to the inner city in Copenhagen, we have as much bike traffic as we had back in the 50s. So it has been a very positive trend. So what turned the development in Copenhagen around? One was this about never miss a good crisis. For those who watched the Dutch movie up there, they said the same about the oil crisis in general, gave politicians and the society a reason to think about, should we do things differently? And then also, again, the context being different. This is a picture from the town hall in Copenhagen. Citizens in front of the town hall demanding better cycling conditions. So we saw those demonstrations in the late 70s because, again, as I mentioned, cyclists were kind of being squeezed out. But there were a lot of people living in the central city that said, hey, you should build on this culture instead of squeezing it out and planning for people from the suburbs coming in cars and big roads. And we were very lucky in Copenhagen that the politicians, they actually listened to the citizens. If they hadn't done that, I probably couldn't have been standing here today showing nice pictures of Copenhagen people on bicycles. How much do we invest? In Copenhagen at the moment, we invest approximately $25 per citizen per year. $25. And another thing about planning for cycling, I think it's very important for cities to ask themselves, so why should we invest in cycling? Because the thing with cycling is that I think sometimes it's almost too good to be true, or you can get kind of bored when people are mentioning all the good things about cycling because there are so many good things. So this is about finding out why is it that you as a city should improve for cycling. And in Copenhagen it's very much about quality of life, very much about convenience, very much about traffic. Where here maybe it's about quality of life, but maybe also about attracting even more tourists and building on a brand as a good city for cycling, also for events. There might be different reasons for each city. Identify those reasons, and then at least in Copenhagen we try very much to remember that cycling is not a mean to an end. No, it's a mean to an end. It's not a goal in itself. It's not like the cycle is messias. It's just a mean to an end. And in Copenhagen, again, that's very much about quality of life. We work a lot with numbers in Copenhagen, especially working in a political context. I think numbers are very important. If you're politicians, you like to know why should we spend money on this and not spend money on this other thing. This is just some of those numbers. There's a web address in the end where you can pick up all these numbers if you're interested. But in fact, if you look at the cost and benefits of cycling in Copenhagen, it is so that, in fact, you earn money when you go on a bicycle if you believe in these methods where you put a value on life and a value on environmental emissions and all that kind of stuff. And in fact, it has a value for society of around 20 cents each time a person goes 1 kilometer on a bike. Whereas, and again, this is Copenhagen numbers. In Copenhagen, it costs the society 10 cents each time a person goes 1 kilometer in a car. And if you go that kilometer in the rush hour, it costs 20 cents because you add more to the congestion by going in your car in the rush hour. You kind of delay everybody else. So this is about working with these kind of numbers. We do a lot in Copenhagen. In general, bicycle infrastructure is very cheap compared to other modes of transport. I used to work with the railway, and everything when you work with the railway costs like tons of money. So suddenly working with cycle projects where you can do a lot for a very modest amount of money compared to other modes of transport is fun and interesting. And this is just some numbers to illustrate this, and also this about how do you tell the story. What is expensive very much depend on what do you compare it to. And I think that's important to remember when speaking about cycle projects, or is it expensive or is it not expensive. Here's some Canadian numbers, just telling the same kind of story. You can get a lot cycling stuff for that much money, not that much money. This is about telling the why. If we just look at the health impact, then it's around 80 cents per kilometer cycled. And the reason is that if you cycle, you're more fit, you can look after your work, and those models where you calculate cost benefits, they calculate that. You're also less ill, so you have to go less to the hospital, which is expensive. And the thing is also, when you cycle, I'm sorry to say, but you also die faster. So by meaning that, I mean you live longer, but when you die, you just, and you're dead. And again, that saves the society money. And again, looking at it from the society level, this is a lot of sense. So in fact, it is so healthy for you to go on a bicycle to work and go back in the afternoon, that you can start smoking as well if you start cycling, and you're just as healthy as you were before. And I even know, I got that from the Canadian Health and Stroke Foundation, that if you drink a beer, you have to cycle 21 minutes, and then it's all gone again. So these numbers, I think it's important to work with also, so why should we cycle in a bit fun ways as well. I think I'll just skip then. But this is about the why, and why should we invest in cycling. Again, it's different from everywhere, but apparently also developers in Vancouver, they really connect cycling with something that is good for society, because this is like commercial science, and they use pictures of people cycling when they try to sell their apartments. So there's a lot of different reasons why, and it's about finding them and working with all the different interests that has an interest in promoting cycling. So just a bit about what we're doing in Copenhagen, how we promote cycling. First about infrastructure, and then a bit about planning and communication. We do a lot of research in Copenhagen. We have focus groups, we have telephone surveys, and we ask, so why are you cycling and why you're not cycling? And the main reason why people choose the bicycle in Copenhagen is not because it's environmentally friendly or because it's cheap. It's because it's easy and convenient. And I very much believe in that, and I very much believe in, if you want to promote cycling, just have to make it easy and convenient, because people in general are pretty clever. If you have different options, most people choose the one that is most easy and convenient for you. It's not like we get up in the morning and think what is best for the environment. Some people do, but if you want to make it mainstream, get a lot of people to cycle, it's very much about quick convenience and stuff like that. Has to be said, of course, the quality of driving a car, the quality of public transport also matters a lot for the competitiveness of the bike. And I think cities has to be explicit about that. There's no need to hide it. That is part of the story as well. In Copenhagen, we work a lot with how should we have parking restrictions and stuff like that. That is important to integrate that in the bicycle planning. But again, it's also a lot about improving quality for cycling. And this is a picture of a standard Copenhagen cycle track. You can just see the pavement to the left, and then we have the cycle track and the street. And that's like the normal way we do it in Copenhagen. And it's very much about, it's nothing special, cycling, it's just a mean of transport. And like you treat the car and trains, buses, whatever, you just have to treat bicycles the same way, also plan it the same way. Nothing special there. It's about, fast and comfortable from A to B. And then, now my girlfriend is here. If you can get a lift with your girlfriend in the cargo bike, then of course it's even better. But I'm not often that lucky. This is just where we have the focus in Copenhagen. This is just the biggest streets for Copenhagen for cycling, and where we look at is very much also coherent network, and this about travel time is important. And then I have this phrase about conversational cycling, because we have so much cycle traffic in Copenhagen. There's a lot of places where you can't go two persons next to each other, because then people will be ringing the bell. And if you go in a car in the rush hour, or in a train or on a bus, you can have a conversation. And I think that should be pretty fair, that you should be able to have a conversation with your friend or with your girlfriend when you go on a bike as well. So we have this thing about conversational cycling, and in fact on the map, all the places where it's blue, that is where we need extra capacity on the cycle tracks so we can have conversational cycling. So there'll be room for having a talk with the one you're traveling with, and people can still overtake you. But that's the focus in some of the things we focus on when it comes to the network in Copenhagen. We also focus a lot on shortcuts where you can save travel time. That could be across water or across big roads. And it doesn't have to be very expensive bridges like these pictures. This is 3 bridges that are all in the pipeline in Copenhagen. Shortcuts for pedestrians and for people on bicycles. But it could also be things like this. We work a lot with the traffic signals in Copenhagen. In many cities they have green waves for cars. You have synchronized several traffic signals. So if you go with a speed of like 50 kilometers or 60 kilometers an hour, you can pass a lot of these traffic signals. So instead of synchronizing for the speed of the car, in Copenhagen we on many streets synchronize it for the speed of the bicycle. So if you go 20 kilometers an hour, you pass a lot of traffic signals after each other. And the interesting thing about this is that does not cost money. It's just a question of political priority. Which mode of transport do you want to prioritize on this street? And this is just a graph called a speed profile, and at the top is how on this stretch the ride on a bicycle was before we made the green wave. As you can see, it kind of goes up and down. At the top one, which means you start and then you go, and then you have to stop, start, and so on. And the top one is where we made the green wave, and you have a much more smooth ride. And in fact, on this stretch, you save like 2.5 minutes just on 2 kilometers going on a bicycle. And the average speed went up from 15 to 21 kilometers an hour. Again, this is just some of these measures that doesn't cost a lot of money. It's more a question of political priority. We also work a lot with making streets where you can only go one way in cars, that you can go 2 way on bikes on those streets. Again, to give you shortcuts. We also do these. One second. Sorry. We also do a lot of these path systems away from traffic. Like you have path systems here, we also work with that. But in Copenhagen, it's very much the cycle tracks that are the bread and butter of the system. Let's get to this one. We also do cycle lanes, like you do here. We don't do that much in Copenhagen. One thing that's very different from North America is that in Denmark, we always do the cycle lane next to the pavement, and then we have the parking. So I sometimes say we use the cars to protect the cyclists instead of using the cyclists to protect the cars. And I don't know if it will be Penticton, but I really hope some cities in North America will try doing the other way around. It gives you much more comfort, costs the same thing, takes up the same space. So who knows, maybe someday in North America there'll be done bike lanes just next to the pavement instead of the other way around. Then back to the city I mentioned, Fredericia, the small city. Just one example of the effect of putting in cycle tracks or cycle lanes. This is just one place they did it, and you have 20% more cyclists, and almost everybody, of course, feels more safe. And when promoting cycling, it's very much about perceived safety, because it is what is in people's head that makes up your decision. So this is about taking perceived safety very seriously and work with it, and also how do you divide, for example, a cycle lane to the traffic. Maybe you put a bit of stuff on that painted stripe so it feels more safe. That's the important thing for me when I make my choice. Crossings is a big thing when working with the traffic, especially with cycle traffic. We work a lot with that in Copenhagen. We have a lot of cars in Copenhagen. This is a 6-lane street just running next to the city hall, and this is one of the big crossings we redid. And you can see from all numbers that if you have accidents in crossings and you redesign them to make them more safe for pedestrians and cyclists, it's a very good cost-benefit ratio. And it's just one of the crossings where we did that. But again, a lot of things can be done very cheap. This is a thing that's being done also in North America. You just pull back the stop line for the cars before the traffic lights, and that means that when cars are turning to the right, the cyclists, they have a head start and they're more visible to the car drivers. Again, cost next to nothing. It's just a matter of paint and getting out there and do it. Cycle parking, we work very much with that in Copenhagen as well. Big challenge. I think what's interesting about cycle parking is also it very often leads to partnerships, and this is about working with big companies, with hospitals, and how can they improve conditions for their employees, or visitors when they come on bikes. That's a big, we try to do even more in Copenhagen. How do you promote having lockers and showers at big workplaces? And this picture is from the Suncor Energy Center in Calgary. So even there they have bike racks. And this is a picture I took today, I think in front of the Skaha Lake Middle School. Also, there's quite a lot of bikes there, and this is about working with schools, working with big workplaces. I think that's a very important part of promoting cycling in general. We work a lot with public transport in Copenhagen because, again, if you have a good combination of public transport and cycling, you have just a more flexible life, you have more convenience, and again, that's very much what it's about. So it's just a picture of how the trains look, where you should enter with your car and with your bike, and then there's good room for bikes in there, but also good bike parking at the stations. The problem with people on bikes is that they want to go where everybody else want to go. And that's often where you don't have that much room, for example in the downtown. And what we can see in Copenhagen, to make bicycling competitive, at least in Copenhagen, have to have access to destinations. You have to be able to go all the way on your bike to the shop or to the cafe, wherever you want to go. And that is also a challenge in Copenhagen, because that's often the street where you have to really have discussions on how should we allocate the space here. But I think that's an important part of promoting cycling. It's about thinking the trip all the way from A to B, all the way from A to B. Maintenance, again, it's a bit of it's very much a political discussion. You don't necessarily have to use more money, but if you want to promote cycling, for example in Copenhagen, snow removal on the cycle tracks is the top priority, together with just 4 roads for cars, and then below we have all the other roads for cars. This is about knowing that you can use your bike even if there's snow, so you don't have to think about it. It's just a habit. Just go on that bike. The city take care of the snow removal. Of course they do, if they want to promote cycling. Because again, it's a matter of prioritization. Where do you start your snow removal? So it's very much a political decision. This is about trying to integrate cycling into the general urban environment. We try to do that in Copenhagen. I like this picture because I think there's like 10 bikes in that picture, but you hardly see them, but people just use the bike. Again, go to wherever you want to go. If that's to take a swim, you bring your bike. If it's somewhere else, you bring your bike. Bottom line in Copenhagen is this about, it's not just romance. In Copenhagen, it's very much about having a Monday morning like this, has to work when it comes to traffic. But again, the reason why to promote it might be a bit different from city to city. But this is what it's very much about in Copenhagen. All these people going to work, they don't care about me or good stories. They just care about that traffic system works for them on bicycles. And that's in fact how we like it. And then we just work with that and try to keep improving it. The last thing I will mention is a bit about planning. Because again, even though different in city sizes, cities still have some tools when it comes to planning. And planning and regulation is a pretty cheap way of getting things done, and it's cheaper to get things right from the beginning than have to redo it afterwards. And this is just one example where some clever guy or girl in Copenhagen in the 70s made a rule that all cabs in Copenhagen, they have to have a bicycle rack in the trunk. So now you know in Copenhagen, if you're visiting friends, having too much red wine, or it starts raining, or you're just tired, you can always call a cab, and you can get your bike with you when you're going home. No problem. Just a very small rule, costs next to nothing for the cabs, but adds a lot, again, to the convenience, to the flexibility of using a bike. Work a lot with developers. I know you do the same in Penticton. Have rules for how much bike parking should they do when they build, and should they put in cycle tracks from the beginning? Yes, they have to do that in Copenhagen if they build larger areas. A lot of things can be done there. And the last thing on the planning is just that working with cycling, even though we in Copenhagen are working very much on making cycling competitive, also on longer distances. As you can see in this slide, which shows the market share and then the distance, and you can see from 0 to 2 kilometer distance to work. Walking and bicycling is pretty much the same. When we go to between 2 and 10 kilometers, cycling is very much the mode of transport, and then we get above 10 kilometers. Then the cycling market share starts to drop down. So for cities, this is about making a dense city, in fact saves city a lot of money in servicing and stuff, and also makes it much more walkable and cyclable, and is one of the most efficient tools also in Copenhagen. The last part is about communication. In Copenhagen, we try very much to think the city's role when it comes to promote cycling is pretty broad. We try to work with a lot of different actors, companies, tourist organizations, health organizations, whoever have the same interest. And we try very much to have the same underlying message in everything we do when it comes to promote cycling, and that is, thank you for cycling in the city. And the reason is that at the end of the day, it saves the city money if people choose the bicycle. Less ill, take off less space on the streets and all that. And that means that the cities actually have more money for libraries, kindergartens, whatever. And in the long term, and that's definitely true in Copenhagen, and it should work that way in most other places, even the more people you get on bikes, the better room you have for those trips that has to be made in cars. Sometimes you have a lot of stuff to carry, or you have a long trip, you go in your car. The more people you can get on those bikes to the side, taking up just a little space, the more room you have for the cars. So this is about having that underlying message, thank you for choosing the bicycle, is something we try to do, whether we're doing campaigns and finding an excuse to celebrate a new project or a birthday for a bike lane or whatever it will be, to when we build stuff. Because also we can see in Copenhagen is that for cities, I mean, we're competing for attention, but what cities can do is we can put stuff out on the streets, we can design stuff, we do design stuff, and for example, at the top left corner, we have angled the garbage bin, because when you go in your car, you're done with your coffee, you don't have to stop your car to get rid of the coffee cup. So of course you should angle the garbage bin a bit, so when you're done with your coffee on your bike, it's easier to hit the garbage bin without stopping the bike. It's a very small thing, costs next to nothing, but the communication value of that is also very, very strong, and in fact maybe even more important than the function. It's again like saying thank you, we see your needs, we try to cater for them. The right-hand corner is a footrest while you're waiting for the traffic light. Why should cyclists have to get wet shoes? Why don't help them a bit? Again, cost next to nothing. And the feedback we got on that footrest is like more than when we built a cycle track that cost maybe $2 million. People were so happy about it because we saw a need and they hadn't seen it before. So this is about thinking about these things, and very much also how do they communicate. I think that's pretty important for cities. That pink car there is parking for cargo bikes. So you can open it up and there's 4 spots for cargo bikes in there. And it's just designed that way to illustrate, yes, that instead of 1 car, you're going to have 4 cargo bikes. But then about working with infrastructure also is communication. I think that's very important to remember. This is from Surrey. This is bike parking, and this is also communication. It sends a lot of signals to both the users and the non-users. That is how your bike parking is looking, and kind of hidden behind the station. So again, and we also have bad examples in Copenhagen, but it's a lot of communication how you do this stuff, and that's back to the bike lanes. Maybe you put some stuff on those painted lanes just to communicate this is safe. That's totally fair. It's just marketing. Now you use the money on the infrastructure. Why don't spend that extra dollar? Yeah, maintenance. This is from Edmonton, very important corridor to the university. I was there in April. I mean, this is maybe the most important bicycle corridor they have, and not to pick on Edmonton, but I know spring started early this year, but maybe they should go out and broom that after Easter each year, and maybe they have to broom it 2 times, but they're very cheap, and it's marketing as well. It sends a signal about we're not seeing you if you have this very not maintained cycle stuff, and then better build a bit less and have money for the maintenance than do too much and not have the money to maintenance it. In Copenhagen, for example, we also see that people that are easier to convince maybe to try the bike is people if you're changing your workplace, or if you are new to the city. So for example, we have a campaign where we target newcomers, because we're always looking for where can we get more cycling. And newcomers is one group in Copenhagen, both from other countries or from smaller cities in Copenhagen. So they get a letter and saying, thank you, welcome to the city, and here's a map of, and this about, again, thank you for cycling in the city, trying very much to have that as the message, the consistent message, whatever we do, and integrate it with both maintenance and infrastructure. I think that's worth having in mind. Yeah, this is just this is the last slide on communication. Two phrases on cycling, where one is civil cycling, where you have values such as convenience, citizenship, life quality, mass culture. Another phrase to describe cycling could be militant cycling, where you could have values such as survival, sports, subculture, rebellion, environmentalism. And this could be some kind of a bar where every city is located somewhere on this bar, and Copenhagen is very much to the civil cycling part of things. and a lot of North American cities are more to the militant cycling side of things. And I think this about working with the story of cycling is pretty important, because one thing is infrastructure, but if it also means kind of almost changing your identity to change your mode of transport from a car to a bicycle, then it's a big step for people to ask them to take. And again, cycling is a bit different, because there's not big actors doing commercial for cycling, and that's where the municipalities has to work with a lot of actors to do that. So just to wrap it up, if Copenhagen should start again, or what maybe we're focusing on even now, 3 things you should remember. One thing is this: if I say to you, do not think of an elephant, I think many of you would start thinking of an elephant, even though I say do not think of an elephant. And I use that to say that I think it's a bit the same with safety. There's a tendency, I think, to speak very much about safety when you speak about cycling. And I think it's very important for the cities to work with traffic safety, extremely important. But I think a lot of people, even you say it's safe, it's safe, it's safe, a lot of people will start being a bit, why do they feel that need to say it's safe all the time? Maybe there's something about it that's not safe. Like when you're trying to sell airline tickets, you're not saying, oh, my airline is safe. You're showing pictures of people having wine and pretty women giving whatever food to them and reading newspapers and again having a good time. It's a bit the same when we try to promote cycling in Copenhagen. It's very much about it's convenient, it's easy, just go out there and do it, and we take care, you have good facilities. So this is when it comes to promoting. But again, you have to work a lot with safety, of course, and this is just to show that we do that in Copenhagen, that we have very good development. The blue line is the kilometers cycled in Copenhagen, and the bottom green line is the bottom pink one is the number of accidents. So we have more and more cycling, and we have less and less accidents, even in absolute numbers. So very good statistics, but we don't speak so much about it. Just speak about it's easy, it's convenient, go out there and do it. The second thing that we would do even more in Copenhagen, and we will still have very heated discussions also in Copenhagen on should we take away car parking, should we take away car lanes or whatever, is this about if to make cycling mainstream and something normal, has to be all the way from A to B that you have high quality facilities. Because if you're going with a kid or you're not used to go on a bicycle, if there's just 500 meters that are very bad or a crossing that feels very dangerous, you won't do that trip. So this is about making good quality even where it hurts, very important. This is a picture from a street in Denmark where we have buses and we have these granite columns, and for many years there was no cycle track. We had probably 10,000 cyclists a day there, and planners and engineers has been saying for 20 years, oh, we can't do a cycle track there, it will be chaos, everything will break down. And there was a politician who said it some years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, you need to build a cycle track there. I want it there. Just do it as clever you can. And we did it, and it works perfectly well. And that also comes back to the tough decisions, and also you can only do, you need that political will to make the tough decisions as well if you have to have a really coherent network of high quality. Otherwise you have too many of these places. This is from Kelowna. I was riding on this very nice bicycle route, and suddenly you meet this sign. And it's kind of, yeah, you feel like somebody gave up on you. And I'm not saying it's easy to solve these places, but it's just a way of life, working with cycling, that you really have to work with these places and come up with good solutions if you want to make cycling something that will be normal and mainstream. Again, I'm not saying it's easy. We have a heated discussion in Copenhagen, but that's just the way it is with cycling. It has to be good quality all the way. And you can do a lot with paint. I use this picture in Copenhagen sometimes because, again, we have the same discussions also internally. I say to the engineers and I work with that you would never see a freeway like this, never ever. You would never have a place where you said to car drivers, please get out of your car, push it for 50 meters and get back in, it's no problem. You would never ever see that. But sometimes there seems to be a tendency that that's how you can plan and build cycling infrastructure. And it's very much about making cycling normal and saying no. You have to deliver good quality all the way. You have to pay respect for the people out there that choose to go on a bicycle. And that is an ongoing thing, and it's very much about also the perception of what is it to cycle, which are the people cycling. It's just normal people tend to go on a bicycle. Have to deliver good quality if you want to promote it. The last slide here is just about remember the marketing. This is a picture of my daughter. She's somewhat bigger now, but this is when she was 1 year old. I just show this picture that I think is very important. It's about mainstreaming, and remember the marketing. You get a lot of effect for those extra money. And that I use the picture of my daughter is just to show you that I will use all possible means to promote cycling, even my own daughter. So to summarize, safety, do not think of an elephant, all the way from A to B, and remember the marketing. And just a bit connected to the last one there, remember the marketing. I'll just finish with showing a short film. It's a film that was done by some of our partners in Copenhagen. It's a bit like a tourist thing, but it also shows that if you work together and get the same values and you have a consistent message, again, as a city you get more for your money because you get other partners to do things that helps your case as well. So now we'll see if the film works, and it's just 3.5 minutes. Yes, please see if the film works, and I think I'll show it up there on the big screen. The question was if people living in the apartments in Copenhagen, where do they keep all the bicycles? In the city of Copenhagen, we have quite a lot of one family housing away from the center, but we also have a lot of apartments. And the 3 places to have your bike. A lot of people just leave the bike on the street because we don't have that much bike theft. If you don't have a very expensive bike, and most people just have, I don't know, don't have like fancy expensive mountain bikes, just a good decent bike. But a lot of apartment buildings have in-house cycle parking at the ground level or maybe down a bit. And also in Copenhagen, in the central parts, almost all apartments are built in like blocks where you have like a big courtyard. And if you walk into those courtyards, there's also tons of bicycles in there.
Hi, thanks. I want to say great presentation. Wonderful that we have. I counted them to my daughter. Boy, 10 good ideas. No, that's 15 good ideas that, like you say, don't cost anything. I have one question. How important is it, do you think, that the plan that we have right now for Penticton, great plan, how important is it that we haven't given Main Street to the bicycles? I think I know why. It's a narrow street, it's dangerous, public reaction would probably be negative, but how important do you think that is in the short term, or how perhaps in the long term would it be, how important to give our Main Street the core for cyclists who currently are kind of all around the core, not on the spine?
Again, all cities have to look at the costs and benefits, and cost here is not just money, it can be other costs. Benefits, not just money, it can be many things. I've just been here in Penticton one day, so it's hard to be very specific, but I thought it was a very nice main street you have in the city core, and I think it's important when working with these things that there's not just one solution that kind of is good. And maybe on some streets, if it's a very central place, you don't have that much room to work with. Even in Copenhagen, there we say, okay, maybe we can't fit in cycle tracks here, but then what we do instead, if we do traffic calming, because if you get the speed down to like 30 kilometers an hour, then maybe you don't need cycle tracks. I'm not saying traffic calming on Main Street is the answer, but I'm saying that the different solutions, probably one that can work at Main Street. And if cycling is to be promoted and be normal, then yeah, again, it's about having access to where you want to go. And that, unfortunately, tends to be streets with a lot of shops, a lot of cafes, and where there's a lot of other people that want to go. So there might be one street you shy away from, but then don't shy away from too many of the other difficult streets, because then it starts to be too fragmented. And the question was if we have a helmet law and how is the helmet issue handled in Denmark. We don't have a helmet law. In Copenhagen, it's like 20% of the people there that are using helmets, a bit less maybe, but it's about 20%. So by far the majority is not using helmets, but a substantial amount are using helmets. And yeah, that's how it is. And the city, there's a lot of very strong opinions on helmets on both sides, both pro and con. And what I think is the main thing, and also where I'm pushing the Danish safety institution, is to do some good research on like the macro level effect of helmets. Because if you're wearing a helmet, you fall down. It's good for you. Very good. The important thing is to find out how does helmet uses affect the perception of cycling, and does it keep other people away from cycling, because it sends a message that it's more dangerous to cycle than it actually is. So you have to weigh up those pros and cons, and I think it's a very important question.
The question I have is regarding that stop and dismount sign that you see there in Kelowna, and we have some of those here in Penticton. How do we get away from the insurance industry and how they kind of direct the way that the city does its processes?
That's a very, very interesting matter. I was in Edmonton with Urban Systems, and I had a bike ride around with the city councilor and the head of traffic planning, and it was kind of Urban Systems, the company I work for, that organized the tour. And before we could go, we had to sign a piece of paper that now we took the risk ourselves. And I got all afraid of cycling. I was like, is this dangerous? I'd never thought about it before. And yeah, so I think it's damn hard. I don't know enough about the rules, but I think, yes, this about having to act as it's dangerous to go on a bicycle it's not good when it comes to promoting cycling. It's something even cities has to think about, how do we handle this issue? And I think that's one of my main messages, that working with cycling, when cities are doing that, they should really consider what is our role here. And it's probably not just infrastructure, it's also questions like the one you just mentioned, or the communication and working with those kind of things, and how do we handle them? Because it means a lot when it comes to making cycling convenient, or how you design solutions.
I just had a question about stormwater drains, and they're often in the bike lanes. That seems that a lot of the utility boxes are there as well. And you guys had some photos of those storm drains in the bike lane as well. And it's just, to me, it's maybe they're safe to bike over, but they're kind of a hassle, especially for your skinny tired bikes. Is there anything you guys have done to avoid those utilities right in the bike lanes?
Yeah, we have when it comes to how I know the English word, but the place where the water runs down, we have two different designs. We have the one that's on the cycle track, and then on cycle tracks where we have very limited space, we have another design where it runs into the curb, so we doesn't have it on the cycle track. And we use that when we have very limited space, because it's very expensive capacity that you're wasting if you have those things on the cycle track. We're also trying to be better at how can we work together with those people that are managing flooding, if there's a lot of rain and stuff like that. I just see it as a way of getting more money for cycle facilities, but because if I can see this is not just a cycle track, it's also help that one day every 5 years where we have a flooding, then that's just perfect. Then we can make even more good stuff.
I was just wanting to know, what is the minimum bike lane width?
In Copenhagen, we have, again, that street where I showed the picture where it was hard to make, we went down to 180, but minimum normally is 250. It was 225 until recently, but then because we have the many cargo bikes, we said we need 250 as standard. And then we have on all those streets where we had the blue color, where we need the 3 lanes each way, then it's 3 meters we aim for.
In one of the problems I see out here is basically education between motorists and cyclists. In Copenhagen, how educated are the car drivers and the cyclists? Like, are they very knowledgeable, the rules of the road and all that sort of thing?
I think I'm pretty often I'm pretty impressed by the people driving cars in Copenhagen, because we have so many cyclists and they're pretty much everywhere. And sometimes if you stand just looking at the scene on a street, and especially if you are going straight on a street and have to turn right, because we have always the cycle lanes or the cycle tracks next to the pavement, so you just have to wait until the cyclists are done, and sometimes you just have to stop there for like, I don't know, 1 minute, maybe whatever, waiting until you can make your right turn, and people do that, and that works very well. And I think one reason is that almost everybody going in cars in Copenhagen, they sometimes go on a bicycle as well. Where we might have some challenges sometimes is that some people in Copenhagen, they're not used to go in a car, and what we're trying to do, sometimes we just had a campaign last year about, we call it good karma in the traffic, and it's about trying to say pay attention and also try to explain how things might look from the car driver's point of view. For example, car drivers that get angry at you because you're not wearing a light, maybe it's not because they get angry, maybe it's just they got afraid, they were close to hitting you, and then that's kind of how you react, and kind of working with that on saying to people on bicycles, hey, be aware, take care. But in general, I think it helps a lot that, because it's so common to go on a bicycle, that most people use both means of transport.
Yeah, because out here we find a lot of car drivers and cyclists that don't have a clue about the rules of the road, and it becomes very antagonistic between the two of them there. I mean, I've had cars run me off the road. I've even had police tell me I'm not allowed to ride on the road. They don't even know the rules. It's got to be a lot better education between the two.
I totally agree about the education, also about using different means to get the story out, how the car drivers, when they get afraid, or how a bicyclist is not just bicyclists, that's people out there that were afraid of being hit by a car, and to make it, yeah, it's nothing about being naive, but this about having a better understanding also makes you take more care of each other. I think that's a basic fact, again, without being naive, but you have to work with that next to the infrastructure and the education.
Penticton has a large amount of people in Penticton live on steep hills around the city. There's a large flat area, but then again they live up these steep hills, and that's a lot of the reason I hear from people why they aren't riding their bikes to work or to different events. Can you give any ideas of what we can do about that, or have you seen that in other cities and what they do about that situation?
I think almost the most important thing is to have realistic goals when you're promoting cycling. I mean, you see, all cities, whether it's Houston or I don't know, Vancouver or Penticton or Copenhagen, if you look at the city, the structure, the people that live there, the kids, whatever, you can find places where it's easier to promote cycling or it's easier to use a bicycle than other places. I think that's the first thing. There's no need to make goals that you can never fulfill, and then you'll all be sad and you'll be like, oh, instead of finding places where you can do good, where you can see progress. So that's one thing. Then I think, I've been in Switzerland, for example, and they have a lot of hills, and I didn't have it in my presentation today, but what is happening with what is called electrical assisted bikes is extremely interesting. In Holland now, the turnover in the sale of electrical assisted bikes last year was bigger than the turnover in sale of normal bikes. So they're really breaking into be a complete normal mode of transport. And for those of you that have not tried them, it's very much like going on a normal bike. It's just like having a wind in your back all the time. It's like drugs, you get hooked on it, so watch out. But they still have a big health effect. They take up no room, and at least in Europe, they cannot go faster than 25 kilometers to be on the cycle facilities. And I think it's about what is the city's role. For example, working with promoting electrical assisted bikes to elderly people, to people on the hills. Buy 20 of those things, borrow them out. You can borrow them for a week, and if you like it, you can buy it with a discount. All those kind of measures to work. That could be electrical assisted bikes, it could be other means, but this is about what is your city like, and where do you have challenges?
In the cities that you've seen that have really solid established programs for intercity transport for bike lanes they've been working on for maybe 20 years or more, do you see solid provable numbers that show that there's a direct correlation between that and maybe tourism into that community? I mean, there must be towns that promote themselves as, the world's most cycle-friendly city, that kind of thing.
What I have seen is mostly research into if you build stuff, do you get more cycling? I haven't seen the next link. Do you then attract more tourists? What I have seen is if you have this list of popular cities, popular destinations, whatever, it's very often that cities that are walkable, bikeable, easy to get around in is quite high on those lists. And then I would assume that and I was around in Penticton today. I think it's pretty good cycling in Penticton already. You have all those mountain bike places, you have events already, so you really have a lot going for you to build on. So it's not like you're starting from scratch, not at all. So I would say you are one of the places where it would be easier not just to see this as infrastructure, but more see this as, the story of Penticton or branding Penticton. Part of that story is in Penticton it's easy to go on a bike. This city welcomes people on bikes. They spend money as well. And you can do quite a lot with not that much money. An example I sometimes use is Seville in Spain, where they had almost no cycling 10 years ago, and now they have like 7% market share. And what they did was they did put in a bike sharing program, but also they just used a lot of paint. And we're thinking about where the city want to go, and was pretty pragmatic about it, but said we want to promote this. And I think it definitely made also Evansville more attractive as a tourist destination. Suddenly you have that extra option. You don't have to walk around being tired. You can just grab a bike if that's what you want to do. So it's an extra option.
Okay, doesn't appear there are any more questions, so let's give Andreas a big round of applause. Thank you so much.